Very warm welcome to all our listeners on NRSMI. Friends, NRSMI is doing a special series called The Real Swadeshi. It's a 3-part series featuring the 8 Jeevan Sathis. And as part of this series today, we have amidst us Kiran Kumar Vissa, who started out as an aid volunteer and went on to become, I would say, a very strong voice of the farmers, for the farmers, and more importantly, highlighting their issues, and at the same time, working in a focused manner in the path of the growth. Now, let's hear from Kiran how the transformation happened, how the whole journey started, and where his journey took him so far, and the lessons and his experiences that you'd like to share along these lines. So, Kiran, very warm welcome to NRSMI.
Yeah, thanks, Suresh. And hello, everybody.
Thanks, Kiran, for being part of the show. So before we kick off and before we get into the details of what the 8 Jeevan Sathi is all about and how your journey began, let me take you down the memory lane a little bit and ask you, when did you actually join AID as a volunteer? At what point?
1995. 1995, August 24th. That was the day that I landed in the US, actually, from India.
I see.
So almost the very first day, I suppose I became an aid volunteer, because when I landed, at the University of Maryland, as a grad student, typically you get put up with some of the earlier grad students.
Right.
So I happened to land in the house where, many of the core aid volunteers were actually staying.
I see.
Yeah. So the very first day when I landed there, they said, welcome to the world headquarters of AID. So I said, okay, I'm here to join.
So you didn't have much of a choice.
Huh? Yeah, I didn't have much of a choice. So it was direct recruitment. Basically, AID at the time was a relatively small organization. There were about, I think, 15, 20 active volunteers. And most of them were in University of Maryland. So we didn't have all these, different chapters in so many cities and so on. I think there was only one chapter which had just started in 95, like July or something like that.
I see.
In Pittsburgh, yeah.
I see. Now, as part of, at that point, as you said, it was relatively very, young organization and probably were not dealing directly with the core issues back in India. So how did that transformation happen from your perspective, where you getting involved with aid volunteer activities, let's say at Maryland, how did you start connecting to the issues back home in India? How did that sort of link happen?
See, what I liked about, the aid group right at the time is that though it was a small group, the vision was quite broad. Even though we might have been involved in only a few projects at the time, just the fact that, they introduced that it was the world headquarters of AID meant that actually there was a vision that actually it will become a larger organization with a lot of spread and so on. But apart from the spread, we actually were very... it was a very vibrant group, very concerned about all the various issues which were happening in India. So every day we used to watch some films which have to deal with so many issues. It could be it could be women's situation in one film. It could be education work in another film. It could be right from what movies we used to watch on getting videos from an Indian grocery store to what kind of things we would discuss in the drawing room. It was all centered around social issues and what difference we can make. So that way it was a very vibrant thing. So we were already deeply engaged in understanding, at least, not that we had a lot of channels to make an impact, on all the issues, but we were very hooked on to various issues, and basically we had this thing that somehow or the other, this whole web of issues related to poverty, injustice, and all that have to be tackled, and we have to be involved in that. So that kind of a sense of mission was there, though it was a small group. So that is what actually really hooked me on, because when I came to the US, I had a small mission of my own that, some of my classmates in IIT Madras who had also come to the US, I had taken the responsibility of contacting all of them and basically connecting some money and sending it back for some charity work back in India. So I was supposedly the coordinator of that. So I started off that work, but as soon as I, came to the US and saw the group aid, I felt that here is a group which is doing the same kind of thing, connecting people who are in the US from India back to the real problems, that are happening in the field in India, connecting them and connecting them in terms of their time, resources and all that, but in a much more meaningful and much deeper way. So I immediately jumped in.
I see.
So as far as...
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Suresh. Yeah. No, you were asking about the evolution, right? How that evolved into connecting more deeply with issues.
Yeah.
So, while we were actually, we already had, at least in our minds, we had a broad canvas, for what aid should be doing, what we all should be doing. So it was very, I think just 2-3 weeks after I joined aid, already it was such a transforming experience. That within a month or so, I was already telling people publicly that, okay, this is what I want to do in life. So, PhD in electrical engineering and all that was basically had already become a side issue in my mind. But that is all in the mind, right?
Right.
But in reality, we were connecting to various issues. I think listening to speakers and social workers who are visiting from India was actually a very big part of it. So with every such visit and every talk that we had, it was actually a transforming experience. So much so that, we used to videotape every single talk. And some of the good talks, we used to watch them again and again. I mean, I remember a talk by Dr. Ramanujam from Tamil Nadu Science Forum. It was a transformative experience. In fact, we used to call it the Bhagavad Gita of adult literacy. He was talking about the adult literacy movement. So we used to watch it, And so like that, I think the connecting to the issues happened through, various visiting social workers, through our own, watching various videos, reading various things, and our visits back to India. So these are the things which actually really connected us. And because we already had the broad canvas in mind that we need to get to the root of the issues, that all the issues are interconnected. So if we want to solve the poverty-related problems, we need to think really deeply. So connecting to different issues kind of came very naturally and organically.
I see. Now, I understand that, so you had a very, very strong foundation, in terms of you becoming an aid volunteer. So the foundation itself was very strong. Now, you were already set in your mind that you have to do this. At what point did you really say that, okay, this is not what I want to do anymore, and switch to become like the Aid Jeevan Sathi? Like, when did that happen in this journey?
Yeah, like I said, I think very early it was clear to me that in my life this is what I want to do, long term, right? So I want to basically be a social activist like these people that I'm meeting, wonderful people and so on. And the other thing is, I think one thing that aid does to you is that it opens up, to different kinds of reality that is there. So one of the realities about your own, career path and what you can do in life and so on. Once you see examples of people who are like you from similar background and so on, but who have been able to actually make an impact, on various issues, then you know that, okay, this is possible. So once a possibility opens up, I think that basically there's no end to it, to how deep you can jump into it. So in that sense, I think it happened early, switch in my mind. And then when the very first visit that I made to India after joining AID, like 1.5 years after I joined AID, I think was also a very important experience. I think that is true for almost all AID volunteers. The first time you go back to India, though you grew up there for 21 years, you've been surrounded by all the same issues and everything. But having now being part of an action group, which is actually trying to make a difference, now you see everything with a different light. It's like you're wearing a totally different set of glasses. And so everything that you see, even when I went to Taj Mahal for the very first time in my life, during that trip, I could see that I was all thinking about the the social issues involved, in what actually Taj Mahal represents, right? So everything that you see, from what is happening on the roads to Taj Mahal, you are seeing with a different lens. So, and then I went and met different social workers, visitor organizations. I took my parents along. I wanted basically them also to be part of the experience. So I think that was somewhere during the first India trip, I felt that, okay, at some point I want to become a full-time social activist.
I see. Now, how did you connect to the farming issues itself? Because your core area of work, your core area of interest is related to the farming, their issues, organic farming, etc. How did you choose to, narrow it down to basically focusing on this aspect?
Well, that also happened over a period of time. I think the very first initiation was when I came across this book called Organic Farming Source Book, which was produced by Organic Farming Association of India. So it's a wonderful book, and has so many stories of different people who are practicing organic farmers and so on. But essentially, it kind of talks about the fundamental philosophy of what agriculture really means, and what growing food and really means, how all the things are interconnected between nature, between health, between our the food that we eat and how it is grown, and the whole cyclical process that is there in nature. And unless we actually nurture that whole process, really nature is not going to survive. Right, so that was the initiation, for me at least. But I was actually interested in so many issues. So at that point, like in '97 was when I actually read the Organic Farming Source Book. But I think by about 2001, I felt that all these issues related to natural resources, water, how we use our soil, how we produce our food. So agriculture, water broadly, became things which really inspired me, because we are also part of the Narmada Bachao struggle, playing a supportive role from the US, and, various campaigns related to natural resources. So basically how we use our natural resources, I think, became one major focal point as far as I was concerned. So both from an activist point of view, that actually you resist the wrong model of development and way of using natural resources that is happening, as well as what kind of transformation can happen, through the sustainable use of natural resources. So both these things were very interesting. So in 2001, I actually decided that, okay, I'm going to take off from work. I had already started doing a job, so I told my folks that about 4 months I'll take off, and I'm going to spend in India. I just said some reasons, unspecified reasons. Luckily, they agreed for me to take a break. So I went and I traveled around quite extensively in the trains, general compartment, everything. So went around, met various people working on water issues, agriculture, sustainable farming, and so on. So I think that kind of really established more deeply my interest and what all I can do and so on. Yeah.
I see. We actually got a couple of questions online. I'll kick off with one. Alok Bang wants to know, how does life, especially life in agriculture and farming, seem from outside India versus in India among the farmers?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. See, I think when you are actually, going to the villages and seeing, how farming is happening, I think, obviously some of the notions that you might have, theoretically, that this is the model of farming which works, or these are the core things that you want to work, I think that those things obviously undergo a transformation. I think one thing that hits you is that the economic crisis that the farmers are facing and the ecological crisis, are both acute actually. So that is the, I think that's the challenging part of it. So while initially my motivation might have been from the ecological side, that this way of growing food, this way of handling our soil, this way of doing farming is actually what is more sustainable, and you want to devote yourself to a sustainable farming. But I think one quickly found that just farmers making their ends meet and becoming sustaining just economically, from whatever expenses they are putting in and whatever output they are getting and whatever income they are getting. So just bridging the gap between them itself has become a big challenge. So even when you're talking about ecologically sustainable agriculture, it is a lot about how to minimize the costs of farming also. So basically you have to marry both of them together. The fact that you need to reduce the cost of agriculture and make it less risky and less intensive with respect to investment and so on, and also use the resources more sustainably. So that kind of interlinkage, I think, is something which becomes very clear once you start working on the ground. And at the same time, the fact that there are so many policy issues that are actually affecting agriculture, actually affecting the well-being of farmers. So we need to intervene also in influencing the policies. So I think that these two things are something which became much more clear.
I see. Now the linkage you said between reducing the cost of the farming and adopting sustainable way of farming, which is nurturing the natural resources. Now that's not an easy conversation to have, right? Even with the farmers, or even with the, like you brought in the policy issues also, even with the policymakers. This is not an easy conversation to have. How do you, like, in your experience, how hard has it been, or how easy has it been to getting this message across?
See, I think that reducing the cost of cultivation, right, I think is something which really strikes a chord with all farmers. So I think that is that's actually something which people universally connect to, because it has become very clear to farmers that the costs of agriculture are rising, and it is not just the cost, it is the amount of inputs that you're putting in. For example, we started working in some villages in Kurnool district in Andhra Pradesh, right? So we started talking to the farmers. This was immediately after the floods that happened there. So we started promoting more sustainable methods of regenerating the soil which was lost and so on. So there was a lot of good reception from the farmers. So then when we started talking about all the sustainable agriculture methods and so on, so one thing which is striking, which it comes across very easily in the conversations with farmers, is that when they started out in 70s with the chemical fertilizers and so on, they used to put one bag of fertilizer for 5 acres. Okay, so that is 10 kgs per acre is what they started off with. Okay, one bag is 50 kgs. So now when we ask how much fertilizer are you putting, it's like average of 10 bags per acre. Okay.
Wow.
So average of 10 bags per acre. Some are putting 8, some are putting 12, and so on. Okay. So it is very clear that even to produce the same output, you are having to actually put more and more inputs. So I think this is something which has become very clear to the farmers. So and obviously the cost is rising, and obviously they are also able to see that this is a this is a losing game basically. That if you have to keep on putting more and more fertilizer to just get the same yield or grow the same crop, what it means is that your soil is continuously being depleted, and you are kind of running the basically you are growing the plants on it's like putting a patient on saline. right? You are just pumping in nutrients only directly to the plant. There's nothing in the soil from which actually it is getting its nutrition, right? So I think these things have actually become clearer to the farmer. So the fact that your input costs are increasing is directly tied to the fact that your methods are actually depleting the resources. So I think these things actually become obvious in the even in initial conversations, especially places where this chemical agriculture has already gone too far. Okay. The thing is about how easily they can be convinced to change. See, that's another matter. See, you can always recognize a problem. So I think that kind of understanding and samajdari farmers have, right? And you can initiate that easily through certain conversations. But then to see the possibility that you can actually get out of this trap is, I think, what requires effort. So you need to actually, they need to be exposed to different examples of successful farmers, and they need to try out in their own villages. Only when they see a neighboring farmer actually doing it successfully, then they would practice, and all those kind of things. So those are actually challenging. But I think just the fact that this input-intensive agriculture has become a high risk and kind of a losing game, I think is becoming more and more clear to farmers.
I see. I have another question on similar lines from Akshay. We have heard many complaints about the effects of pesticides on the health of farmers and farm laborers, like endosulfan in coffee plantation and in Karnataka and Kerala, or pesticides in Kashmir Valley orchards. How prevalent this effect is? Are we heading in the right direction in farming? I think it's just what you just described, but do you want to answer that online question?
Yeah. So I was just talking about fertilizers, but pesticides, obviously, I think the scene might be more gory in the sense that it's not only about it has a much more direct impact on the health and so on. So I think this whole endosulfan created crisis in plantations and in and nearby plantations in Kerala and Karnataka, I think is very, very bad. Watching the scenes of the children there who are affected and so on, with birth defects, all kinds of things, I think is very, very sad picture. And the thing is that kind of thing is happening in many more places now. So I think that whole, the trap that we have got into with respect to pesticides, I think is something which is very sad thing, and we need to get out of that. And I think there are very effective methods for controlling pests in a natural way, and many farmers and thousands of farmers are actually practicing such things. It's not just one or two very determined and resourceful farmers who are able to do that. Thousands of farmers in AP, in other states, are actually now controlling most of the pests without using the chemical pesticides. So I think that this whole use of chemical pesticides is something that we need to move away from. And also, use of chemical fertilizers. Pesticides might go first, and then fertilizers might go more slowly. But essentially, much more natural resource-based kind of agriculture, I think, is what we need to move towards. So, but unfortunately, now basically India, there are a lot of forces which are pushing it in the other direction, towards more resource-intensive farming, towards more industrial-style farming, and so on. So, the way I see it, India is at a crossroads. We need to make a decision whether we are going to go down the more sustainable agriculture route or towards high input intensive industrial agriculture kind of a model. And I think that it is a real choice. It's not that there's no alternative, we have to go down the industrial agriculture path, because very, very hopeful situation is there for sustainable agriculture, for organic agriculture in India. It's just that we need to actually grab that opportunity.
So is the reason why India is moving towards this resource and input-intensive agriculture is the pressure that's coming from this so-called industrial agriculture that we slowly seem to be moving towards, or the corporate agriculture?
Yeah, see, the thing is, that movement started with the Green Revolution itself, right?
Right.
See, with the Green Revolution in 60s and 70s, late 60s, which started in late 60s, already this whole model of, unless you put chemical fertilizers, you cannot increase the inputs, you cannot increase the yields. Unless you put pesticides, you cannot control, and so on. That mindset has already become ingrained since 70s, right? So, but at least during those 3 decades, like maybe until mid 90s or early 90s, there was a thing that agriculture, is still going to be predominantly based on small farmers, marginal farmers, basically what you can call as peasant agriculture, as opposed to industrial scale farming and so on. So I think that was very clear among the policymakers that peasant agriculture is what is going to be in India, and what all support systems are required for that, those need to be in place. But sometime during 90s and after that, in this whole globalization period, the same thing of importing all the ideas from the West and so on has actually pushed the thinking also towards saying that small farmers and this kind of a farming, family farming, is not viable. We have not seen a successful experience of countries doing that. So it's inevitable that we actually should move out of that and move towards a Western style farming. So this has become thinking of many of the people, especially in the policy making circles. Okay, so I think that is the progression that is there. It initiated during Green Revolution time, from the globalization, liberalization period, becoming much more focused on importing the Western style of farming.
I see. Now,
so I guess what I'm saying is that
right.
just one thing. I think what I'm the way that you framed the question. See, I think that the push coming from industry and agribusiness and so on is one aspect of it. So that push is certainly coming. At the same time, it is also really a matter of vision, right? Even it's not only vested interest; it's also a lack of the right kind of vision. So both are there. So both are kind of playing into each other.
Now, the thing about Green Revolution is, since this was enforced by the government and it was run by the government, it was able to influence the farming population across the country, and we are seeing the effects 20, 25 years down the line. Now, for organic farming, or for the natural, way of farming, for this to happen, we have to have the backing of the government, and we have to have them adopt this as a part of their policy making decisions. Only then we can see such a transformation. So towards that, how much of an effort or how much of push the NGOs, and in this case AID and activists like you and other people can actually make, and if they are making, how has their response been so far?
See, I think I generally like to look at the positive side of the story, okay? So I see a lot of positive developments as far as, promotion of organic and sustainable agriculture is concerned. The government needs to do much more, but there are, different pockets in which the thinking within the government is also changing. So many states have actually adopted organic farming policies about promoting organic farming. Kerala, I think, has one of the most progressive ones, which basically said that in 5 years we want to progressively transform the entire Kerala state into organic. Okay. Of course, they have not gone too far into achieving that, and then the government changed and so on. But at least the fact that a state through a deliberative process could come up with a policy that it should go 100% organic, I think shows that in the mainstream also the thinking is changing. For example, a state like Sikkim, they are really moving on target, towards making the whole state entirely organic. States like Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, a lot of states have adopted organic farming policies. But of course, adopting a policy is one thing. Actually, turning into reality is another thing.
Right.
So that is where we are. We are basically in the gap between general, broader acceptance of the fact that sustainable agriculture is a viable thing and, can be done at a large scale. I think that acceptance of that is growing, but enough energy and resources and ingenuity and, all kinds of things from the government side are not yet being put in that direction. Okay, so but I'm hoping that will be the next step. If there is enough push.
Okay. I have another online question, Kiran. Vijay wants to know, hi Kiran, does your scope of work cover animal farming? We hear very little about animal farming practices in India. What are the trends and challenges there? Is it also trending towards the industrialized model in the U.S.?
Well, typically in India, animal farming and growing crops has not been seen as two separate things. So in sustainable agriculture circles and so on, right? I mean, among farmers and organizations which are working on sustainable agriculture, I think they always go hand in hand. So essentially, you have the cows or buffaloes or even hens and small animals like goats and sheep and so on, always integrated within the agriculture. So I think that generally when we are talking about sustainable agriculture, it is an integrated kind of farming where animals are also there. So that's one thing. But if you look at the general trend, whether it is becoming more like the quote-unquote animal farms in the West, right? More industrial style of thing. It has begun to happen to a certain extent, also in certain animals. I think, for example, dairy is still largely decentralized, like even big dairies collect from thousands and lakhs of farmers. They have collection centers of milk, and many farmers with 2-3 cows sell their milk to these dairies, and that is how even the big dairies are running. Okay, but in certain cases, I think poultry especially, the larger industrial kind of style is there, though the scale is still much smaller than what is in the US and so on. But the similar style of operation, I think, has come in really strongly in the case of poultry. In the case of goats and sheep and so on, lots of goats and sheep are actually owned by small and marginal farmers in the dry land and rain-fed areas. So that again is a very decentralized kind of thing. In fact, almost like in AP, for example, some animals, about 7.5% of the GDP of the state comes from animals. I mean, from this whole animal husbandry, essentially. Okay, it is not realized. I mean, people don't realize that that extent of contribution is there, because in terms of any budgetary support and all that for animal husbandry, it is less than 0.5% of the budget. But 7.5% of the GDP actually is being contributed, and a lot of these people are just small and marginal farmers who are just rearing goats, sheep, and buffalo and cows.
I see. So Kiran, switching the focus a little bit towards, these are actually the core issues related to the farmers and how we touched upon a few things that you, in terms of policy making and so on and so forth, have been doing. But in terms of creating awareness, where we try to engage the people in general, how do we, sort of go about saying that organic farming or goods produced from the organic farming is something that we as customers should ask for, should demand? Because that's another angle from where we can sort of push this transformation as well. So could you speak a little about what kind of efforts or initiatives on the lines of, I know you're involved in the National Safe Food Day or the BT Brinjal thing and the Biodiversity Festival. Could you please share a little thoughts on those awareness-related activities that you have been involved with?
Yeah, definitely. And so first thing I want to say is that it is the I think disconnect between general consumers. I mean, consumers of food is basically everybody, right? Between the general population and agriculture, I think the growing disconnect, especially between the people in the urban areas and agriculture, I think is one of the negative developments in the last 40 years or so. That is something I think that needs to be addressed, even independent of sustainable agriculture or organic agriculture. So in that sense, I think that we do hold a lot of awareness events and so on, just to connect consumers to farming issues. Partly it is about their own health, partly it is about more environmentally friendly farming, partly it's about the fact that farmers are committing suicides in such large numbers and going through a distress, and what is the role that we as citizens or consumers can play in addressing the agrarian crisis. So I think those kind of activities we do quite a bit. So we go to even colleges and schools and do some talks and video screenings and so on. We also have started an initiative called Sahaja Aharam along with Center for Sustainable Agriculture to promote organic food in Hyderabad, and similar initiatives are happening in various parts of the country. And so I think that these organic food initiatives, I think, are very interesting development, and it is catching on really fast, especially in the cities, but also even in small towns and so on. General awareness about the fact that our food system as it exists now is really problematic in terms of its impact on health and environment and so on. I think there's a growing realization, so that is a positive trend, and we are involved in many of such activities. So I think the response from I think consumers that we see is that actually there's much more demand than what we can meet through these channels. So it has to actually become much more organized and much more large scale.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the Sahaja Aharam effort just a little bit before I make this public announcement. For friends, whoever is listening to NRSMA, thank you very much. NRSMA, as you know, is a non-profit, independent alternate media. It brings positive stories from grassroots workers such as Kiran Kumar Vissa today from all corners of India. And we do not rely on any corporate funding, and all our shows are commercial free. And we run entirely on your donations and only on your donations. So please consider donating to NRSMA, and all our donations are kept transparent on our website. You can go in at any time and take a look at all your contributions. Thank you very much. So Kiran, switching back, so you said Sahaja Aharam, and you also said that there is a demand that you currently cannot meet. So I'm assuming that you currently are working with farmers at the ground level, and that's how you are getting the produce directly to Sahaja Aharam and then giving it back to the consumer. So is there a concerted effort in sort of increasing that supply base of yours, which means getting more and more farmers into the organic stream, and is there any effort on those lines? Can you speak about that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are two issues here. One is that when I talk about this, more demand than what we can meet, the issue is not that there are not enough farmers growing food organically. Okay, the issue is actually connecting the supply chain, between the farmers who are growing organically and the consumers who actually want organic food. I think is the one which is the challenge right now. Because it's been not an organized, effort into actually building that supply chain. So that is where I think the gap comes in. So there are a lot of farmers who are growing organic food, and we, as a network of organizations, like, for example, AID works with Center for Sustainable Agriculture in promoting organic farming in certain areas. We might be working with Kheti Virasat Mission or, Earth 360 and various initiatives, Chetna Vikas and so on in different places. If you just take Hyderabad city, I think within 100 kilometers of Hyderabad, there would be many farmers who are actually cultivating, food organically or at least without pesticides and so on. But organizing a supply chain which actually gets from all these people and does the supply, I think is the challenge which is there. It's also an opportunity, I think, to build a viable businesses, which can do that kind of a connection.
I see. So, no, you also said that you went to the colleges and students with videos or presentations and talking about these issues, right? How has their response been? Because these are, I believe, yes, easy issues on the surface of it, but the underlying issues are like way too much to absorb. So, but in general, how has their response been?
See, the response as far as the food awareness goes,
right.
I think has been very good in the sense that, everybody appreciates that, to know much more about food. And once you trigger off their interest, I'm sure that they would be actually going and exploring a lot of these things on their own also. So in some of the colleges, we've had people, who would come, students who would come to us to do their, summer projects and so on, or, some classroom projects and all that related to food. And related to farming and so on. So I think that kind of interest is being generated.
Right.
But of course, all these are smaller efforts.
Right.
If some of these things can actually get into the curriculum and so on, then they would make an even bigger difference.
Right.
So just talking about a little bit, on the bigger kind of impact, in Madhya Pradesh, for example, Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Dr. Ramanjanelu and myself, we also interacted with the Madhya Pradesh state government. And CSA has actually been involved in developing a curriculum for students related to agriculture. So, getting from the primary school onwards, making agriculture as part of their curriculum, not as a separate subject, like SUPW or something, right? Socially useful, productive work that you do one day, 1 hour a week or something.
Right.
But in their science, in their science textbooks, in their outdoor field work, and in their mathematics, in their languages. Everywhere you include themes of agriculture and include actual field work. Every school having a kitchen garden, for example, all government schools having kitchen garden. So these are some of the steps that actually the MP state government has taken since last year. So I think we can see, how far it goes and has an impact. But I think something like that actually needs to be done in all the states.
Right. So this is interesting, Kiran. So Madhya Pradesh has already implemented this since last year. And for is it from like all the way from like what grade does this curriculum get introduced?
See, right now, basically, there's one minister who is in charge of primary schools. Archana Chitnis. So when we had interacted with her, she showed interest in this, and through her initiative, this has happened in the primary schools, starting from the primary schools. But it is now being also expanded to the secondary schools and so on. Basically, right from first class to 10th class kind of a thing. At least that is what is in the works as far as Madhya Pradesh is concerned.
I see. All right. Kiran, now just in general, if you have any message that you want to give to our listeners in terms of how they can get themselves involved in the volunteer activities that you are doing, or just be aware of this disconnect that you just mentioned, especially with the urban areas and the ground realities of the farming and their issues. Is there any message or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. 2-3 things. Okay.
Sure.
One, actually, just to going back to an earlier question of outreach to general population, right? About agriculture issues. I just wanted to mention that we also were involved in a nationwide yatra called Kisan Swaraj Yatra, which we did in October to December 2010, where we actually did it as a bus yatra with almost 400 organizations involved across the country, and it was like a 75-day long yatra. Going through 20 states. So there we actually had so many good interactions with both the people from the farming community, from the cities, from the towns, small towns and marketplaces and so on. It was a very vibrant, kind of an outreach effort that happened. And through that we also built a consensus around some of the demands, from the farmers side. So it was an outreach effort of connecting various people to farmers' issues at one level, and at another level also building a advocacy agenda, around farmers' issues. So through that we came up with something called like Kisan Swaraj Niti, which we believe that the whole policy around agriculture and natural resources needs to be transformed, and done with a totally different kind of a framework, and that is what we are calling as Kisan Swaraj Niti. Okay, so a lot of advocacy work is happening around various components of Kisan Swaraj Niti, where ecological agriculture is one part of it. Then, rights over seed, rights over land. Now there is a lot of debate going on around land acquisition bill, and also about land reforms and so on, and also about economic security for farmers, so that they can get a fair price for their produce, and also get various kinds of support systems from the government, whether it's for credit, for insurance, for marketing support and so on. So these are all the different aspects of the Kisan Swaraj Niti. So there is a full-scale policy advocacy agenda that we have been working on. So there is a larger alliance called Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture. The short form is ASHA, Alliance for Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture, in which there are about 400 to 500 organizations across the country. So that is one of the advocacy platforms, not only advocacy but linking up various sustainable agriculture work also. So I would really like various people to tune in to ASHA. The website is called kisanswaraj.in. .in, www.kisanswaraj.in. So there you can follow some of the things that are happening, and also I think ASHA has a Facebook page and so on. So that is one of the platforms where almost many of the really good organizations, individuals working on agriculture and farmers issues are actually involved in the network. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is that I think people really can get involved at 2 levels. One is that through this kind of a network building, as well as by working with various organizations, now we have a very good set of sustainable agriculture work projects that are going on around the country that we can actually support through aid. And aid is already supporting some of these projects, and it is actually looking to support many more. And there's also something called an agriculture fund that aid has created. So I think to really help in terms of farmers' issues and sustainable agriculture work, we can actually do this through project support. Two very good alternative works that are happening, and once these efforts build certain models, because they are also parallelly working on advocacy, these same models can also be instrumental at a larger level change. Okay, so I think that is one way that people can really get involved. And the third one is through, through supporting or getting involved in organic marketing efforts, like Sahaja Aharam in Hyderabad or Restore in Chennai. There's a Sahaja Samruddha in Bangalore. There are a bunch of efforts in Mumbai, Delhi, and so on. So I think a lot of that information is also there on kisanswaraj.in. And anybody who is interested, I can also hook them up with different people in in various places. So you could tell your parents who are living in those cities to actually start purchasing from the stores and so on.
Yeah, at least I've told my parents to get things from Sahaja Aharam, and they've been really enjoying their food ever since. So thank you very much, Kiran, for your time. And the friends... yes.
Suresh, just one more thing. One more thing I wanted to share is that actually I am going to be visiting the US for a few weeks, for a month, from mid-May to mid-June. So during that time, I would like to interact with any of the people in the US groups. Not only 8 chapters, but various groups which are interested in supporting agriculture work in India.
Sure.
So I think that is something that they can contact me. I think you can just give my email address also for people who are interested.
Sure. And is this schedule of yours published anywhere, Kiran, yet, or is it going to be available soon? Like which cities you're going to be in, at what time, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so that will be put up on the AID website as and when it gets finalized.
Okay.
But my period of stay in the US is like roughly from May 20th to June 25th.
Got it.
Okay, so during that time, I can also be contacted while in the US, or if somebody wants me to come and speak to any group in the US, I can do that. And the other thing I wanted to say is also that Dr. Ramanjanelu from CSA is also going to be on a visit to the US from May 24th to June 10th or so, about 15 days. He'll be at the AID conference also.
Right,
so that's also, I think, a valuable opportunity for people to connect, for people in the U.S.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Kiran, very much for that information. So, friends, if you'd like to get in touch with Kiran or any of the organizations who want to get in touch with Kiran, his email address is Kiran Vitsa, Vissa, kiranvitsa@gmail.com. And as he mentioned, he'll be in the U.S. from mid-May to mid-June. In various cities, and you can check the AID website for the actual schedule of his stay in the U.S. So, Kiran, thank you very much for being on the show. There were various other topics that we definitely wanted to discuss more, but time constraints always play a huge role. But given the focus that you have on the agriculture, the sustainable way of doing the farming, and most importantly, your positive attitude, because no matter how difficult the situations are, you seem to be looking at the positive side of things, which I believe is a good way to spend your energy and also make things happen. So thank you very much for all your passion, and we will definitely hope that your effort, bring the change that you have been fighting for.
Thank you, Suresh. I think it's very good interacting with everybody on NRI Samay, and I think NRI Samay is a very good effort and initiative, so keep it up also.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you very much. That was a big boost towards the end coming from Kiran. So, friends, stay tuned for NRI Samay next week again. We'll catch up with you, bring you more stories, more shows. And if you know of any person or any organization, any activity that you would like NRI Samay to broadcast, please send an email at nrisamay@gmail.com. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you.